The talk on Parliament Hill is the Justin Trudeau threat to sue Andrew Scheer over lying. Is it just an empty threat? To talk more about it and some of the other big stories coming out of Ottawa is our parliamentary reporter Ray Filion. Ray, is this more about just a distraction taking the focus off of Trudeau's troubles? Scheer is welcoming the lawsuit, so Trudeau will have to talk about SNC-Lavalin under oath.
Well, yeah, that was the big surprise of the week for me. I mean, why did Justin Trudeau send that legal letter to Andrew Scheer in the first place? I mean, the Prime Minister explained this week that, you know, in politics, there are lots of debates, but he says he wants to teach Andrew Scheer, the leader of the official opposition, a little lesson here that you can't say whatever you want. You can't lie to Canadians. But the problem is this threat of a lawsuit has basically allowed Andrew Scheer to keep talking about the whole SNC-Lavalin mess, which is something that Mr. Trudeau and his Liberals desperately want to turn the page on. They want to talk about something else. They've been trying to do that for weeks. They were on the cusp of achieving just that because no new facts have come out lately. But then, boom, Mr. Trudeau sends that legal letter to his main political opponent, giving him a golden opportunity to keep talking about that. And that's exactly what happened throughout the week. The Conservative leader has been, you know, he was asking Mr. Trudeau one question: when are you going to take me to court? Because I really want this to happen. Please sue me. As you know, the Conservatives and other political parties have been demanding an independent inquiry or some sort of an inquiry into the whole SNC-Lavalin scandal. And if Justin Trudeau does go ahead with, if he does make good on his threat to take Mr. Scheer to court, well, you'd have a sort of independent investigation in a courtroom somewhere in Ottawa, presumably. But I don't think it's going to happen. Personally, I don't see Mr. Trudeau, the Prime Minister, making good on that threat. But of course, the Conservatives aren't letting that one go. They keep asking the Liberals, please take us to court.
Ray, Jane Philpott claims that the Prime Minister broke the law when he kicked her out of caucus. Now, did he?
Well, we're not going to have an answer to that question anytime soon because she asked the Speaker to rule on it. That was on Tuesday morning when she rose in the House of Commons to claim that the Prime Minister did break the law, the 2015 law that regulates Parliament, because there was no vote to expel her, to kick her out of the Liberal caucus last week. She says that the Prime Minister didn't have the right to kick her out by himself, although Justin Trudeau says he consulted with caucus at length before making that decision. But the ruling came down on Thursday morning. The Speaker basically said that he doesn't have jurisdiction over the way the Liberals and other parliamentary caucuses go about their things, go about governing themselves. And that request from Ms. Philpott actually prompted a lot of Liberals this week to ask a question, which is, why is she doing this? You know, she doesn't want to get back into the caucus. Why is she's just trying to be a burr in our shoes? I interviewed the former Liberal cabinet minister earlier this week, and she says she's doing this out of principle. She feels that her rights were breached, and it's a question of principle, not just for her, but for all other MPs. She claims that an MP cannot be kicked out of a caucus without a vote. She also told me that she's been approached by other political parties here on the Hill, which is not kind of surprising because last week after she was kicked out of the Liberal caucus, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, and Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, both said that they're interested in having discussions with her to perhaps get her to join their political movement. So she wouldn't say who she's been talking with, but she says she's had some discussions and she's actively considering their offers to perhaps run under a different banner in the next election. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. She also told me during the same interview this week that the last few weeks have been very, very difficult for her, especially her relations with her former Liberal caucus colleagues, rather. Apparently, things have been very frosty, and she says she finds it very, very hard to deal with.
Yeah, I can just imagine it'd be very intense. Democratic Institutions Minister Karina Gould is not happy with the social media platforms and have responded to her request for help. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, as you know, there was a report tabled earlier this week that says it's a report from the Communications Security Establishment, an update from a previous report they did back in 2017 about possible foreign interference in the Canadian electoral process. We're going to have an election here in Canada in 6 months' time. That report says it's very likely that foreign entities are going to try to disrupt our election in some way. And back in January, when the Democratic Institutions Minister held a news conference to announce that the Trudeau government was taking steps to try and prevent that foreign interference in our democratic process, she says that she was trying to get the social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter to cooperate. And this week, during another news conference, she said she's very disappointed with their response. She's basically accusing them of standing in a corner with their arms folded, doing nothing. She'd like them to share information, but she feels like they're not cooperating fully, and that they won't do so unless they're forced to do it. And she's actually considering legislating. Now, obviously, there are only 7 weeks of parliamentary work left here in the nation's capital before summer. So obviously, we're not going to see any sort of legislation to coerce those social media platforms in time for the next election.
Many Canadians are shocked that a company which had over $750 million in profit, Loblaw, was given $12 million, taxpayers' dollars, Ray, from the Liberal government. It's a story that's not going away. What are you hearing right now on the Hill?
No, it's not going away. As you said, the Environment Minister announced $12 million for Loblaw earlier this week, which is the largest grocery chain store in Canada. The money is to help the company fight global warming, replace some old fridges with newer ones so that they don't emit as much greenhouse gas. Loblaw is claiming that this grant will help them reduce their overall carbon footprint by 23%, the equivalent of taking off 50,000 cars, taking 50,000 cars off our roads. But the feds are getting a lot of criticism over this. As you said, Loblaw is a very, very profitable Canadian company, the largest chain in the country. It reported $221 million in profit just in the fourth quarter of the last fiscal year. And many people have also questioned the wisdom of giving a company like this, public subsidy to a company that has admitted to taking part in a 16-year conspiracy to fix the price of bread. So, yeah, very controversial announcement by the Trudeau Liberals. The government has said it's important to fight climate change and that they're simply putting their money where their mouth is, doing their part for the environment. But obviously, it's not sitting well with a lot of people in Canada.
Ray, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau blasted Andrew Scheer in QP recently about a Tory senator who questioned whether white supremacy is much of a threat in Canada. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, a Conservative senator from Quebec, his name is Leo Housakos. Earlier this week, he was questioning the Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, at a Senate committee, and he suggested that white supremacy is not a significant threat to our way of life here in Canada, to our democracy. Freeland responded that she absolutely believes that white supremacists do pose a threat. She pointed, among other things, to the massacre in Quebec City in 2017, that deadly shooting at a mosque in Quebec City. And that whole controversy, which erupted the next day in the House of Commons, prompted Andrew Scheer to say he had spoken to Senator Housakos and to issue a statement that says he does believe that white supremacy is a problem in Canada, just like in other Western democracies. And Mr. Scheer also accused the Liberals of inflaming those threats to divide Canadians and score political points. Now, obviously, we're 6 months away from the next election here in Canada, so the rhetoric is getting a little out of hands, and we're not done, I'm afraid, hearing stuff like that. Everything is just being inflated right now on Parliament Hill, given that we're so close to the election.
Absolutely. Ottawa says it wants to crack down on people who are unfairly claiming refugee status in Canada. Ray, is it still a big problem?
Yeah, it is still a big problem. Since January 2017, over 40,000 people illegally crossed the border from the U.S. into Canada to claim asylum status. The government calls them irregular, not illegal, irregular asylum seekers. So they introduced, in the budget bill that was introduced earlier this week, a bill that says basically that anyone who comes into Canada that way, who has already filed a request for asylum in the United States will be turned back. They're going to be sent back to the U.S. They say they don't want those people shopping for a country. What I do find ironic is the fact that this bill is actually part of the budget implementation bill. And I find this ironic because when they were in opposition, the Liberals used to complain about those massive budget bills that were introduced by the former Harper government. They said it was undemocratic, that those bills shouldn't exist because they include so many things that don't have anything to do with the budget. And now that they're in power, they're doing just that. And you have the opposition complaining that the new government is doing what they themselves used to do. So I guess for Canadians, it's hard not to be cynical toward politicians when you see stuff like that happening in politics.
Ray, a lot of the gun owners I've spoken to here on the prairies, farmers and ranchers, they're not happy about Bill C-71, lawful gun owners. Now, the new gun control bill is being debated in the Senate. Ray, not everyone is happy with some of the recent amendments.
No, not everybody is happy with some recent amendments that were introduced by the Tories in the Senate. They're calling, as you know, with this bill, the Liberals want to introduce more stringent controls for background checks and stuff like that, increased record keeping for retailers, which are making proposed changes that are making a lot of hunters very unhappy. Now, after a thorough study, the Senate Conservatives proposed a series of amendments, which the independent senators are complaining are watering down the intent of the government legislation. So it looks like a showdown could be looming over this in the Senate right now. Mind you, the independent senators have a majority in the upper house, so chances are those proposed amendments will be defeated, but that's where things stand at the moment where Bill C-71 is concerned.
Now, it's hard to believe that the new trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico is still not ratified. Ray, what's the future of the USMCA?
Yeah, we're still talking about this many months after the new deal between Canada, the United States, and Mexico was signed during a big ceremony. The thing is still, the big issue is those much despised U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. They're still in place nearly a year after they were introduced by the Trump administration. And many people are calling on Christopher Filion and the Trudeau government at large to not have the USMCA ratified for as long as those tariffs are in place. And this seems to be the way the government wants to go. They say they don't want to reopen talks. Christopher Filion said this week that'd be tantamount to opening a Pandora's box. But, you know, those tariffs being in place, a lot of people say that's probably the only kind of leverage that Canada has left. The aluminum industry was complaining this week that the tariffs on Canadian aluminum products alone are costing the industry some $60 million a week. We're talking about a lot of money, a lot of jobs that are at stake. So, this whole thing certainly creates uncertainty. The fact that the agreement was signed, but still hasn't been ratified, is still not in place right now. Mind you, in the meantime, it's not the end of the world, because for as long as the USMCA is not ratified, it's the old NAFTA that still applies when it comes to commerce between the three countries. And a lot of people will argue that NAFTA was actually a better deal than the new USMCA.
A real somber moment in Ottawa. There was a rally on Parliament Hill marking the 10-year anniversary of Tory Stafford's murder. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, April 8th, 2009, 8-year-old Tory Stafford was abducted as she was making her way home after school. Her body was later found. 2 people were convicted for that despicable murder. And you'll recall last year we talked a lot about Terry Lynn McClintock, one of the killers who was not in prison anymore. She was spending time at a healing lodge in Saskatchewan, which is a place that has no fences. It's not a jail. It's not a prison. So there was a demonstration on Parliament Hill on Monday, on the day of the 10-year anniversary of that gruesome murder. Her father was there. Tory Stafford's father. Participants called for longer and stricter jail sentences for violent offenders, and the weather was absolutely miserable here on Monday. So good on them for showing up, for braving the elements to be there.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
You bet, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great day.